Day 1271 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 1,070,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 940 in the past day. Then as for hardware, 2 tanks, 5 APVs, 43 artillery, and 1 multiple launch rocket system. And now edging to the map, but firstly, the night's barrage on sites inside of Kharkiv and Odessa wasn't the only strike to land before dawn. From Washington, Donald Trump lobbed his own salvo, a late-night Truth Social post that laid down his version of peace. He claimed Zelensky could end the war almost immediately, quote-unquote, but only if Ukraine agreed to 2 steadfast conditions: no return of Crimea and no NATO membership. The timing was hardly subtle, just days after meeting with Putin and on the eve of his White House talks with Zelensky. And according to that announcement, Trump will first meet with Zelensky at 1:15 p.m. Washington time in the Oval Office, followed by a joint session with European leaders at 3 p.m. in the East Room of the White House. Joining will be quite the number of European leaders, including Macron, Starmer, Merz, Meloni, NATO General Secretary Rutte, and more. Really quite the geopolitical all-star cast, determined to show that peace cannot be built on Moscow's terms alone, and where Zelensky is expected to present a counteroffer in response to the initiatives put forward by Russia at the Alaska summit, which is unlikely to involve officially ceding any territory, but rather accepting the front lines as they currently stand in some sort of treaty or ceasefire agreement, though he may have a few cards up his sleeve, as Ukraine has just pulled the curtain back on a weapon that physically reshapes the battlefield map. The Flamingo cruise missile, now said to be in serial production, carries a reach of 3,000 kilometers. That means all of Russia west of Omsk is suddenly in range of a high-speed, heavy payload strike system built to hit deep and hit hard. The FP5 Flamingo comes in at 6 tons, with a 1-ton warhead, a 6-meter wingspan, and speeds brushing 950 kilometers per hour. Navigation is guided by GPS and inertial systems, and it's also surprisingly nimble, with launch options ranging from ground rams to aircraft, offering flexibility for Ukraine's growing strike arsenal. So the Ukrainian development of the Flamingo is one of an impressive feat in the broader geopolitical context, given that only a handful of nations around the world field missiles reaching the 3,000 kilometer mark. 11 countries operate them in total, but only 9 both deploy and indigenously develop them. The usual suspects fill the list: the States, China, Russia, the UK, India, France, Israel, Iran, and North Korea, though even Germany's not on that list. But there is nuance, with some ongoing talk of German financing involvement behind the program. So it's a weapons platform far beyond Ukraine's regular missile roster, and so much concerning so that even Russian state media outlet RT couldn't resist trying to skew the narrative here. They framed the Flamingo's debut as not the gesture of a side seeking peace, but for Ukraine, that's exactly what it has felt like coming from the Russian side since day one. But back to news shortly, because now to the map, where last night Ukraine lit up another weak spot in Russia's war machine, with the Transneft oil depot in the Tambov region hit, and by morning the NASA fire hotspots were still showing red. This wasn't just a storage tank, it's part of the backbone moving fuel through Russia's pipeline network. Every strike just like this forces Moscow to juggle supply, reroute flows, and cover another hole in its logistics. So while the map shows the flames, the bigger story is pressure. Ukraine is making sure Russia feels the war not just at the front, but in the infrastructure that keeps the front alive. And those Ukrainian oil sanctions are working, and that pressure is showing. For instance, and in a well-timed update, in occupied Crimea, A95 automotive gasoline has vanished from stations, with what little fuel remains only offered for sale to specific enterprises. Then, in Russia's Far East, at the same time right now, drivers in Vladivostok and Primorsky Krai complain that A92 and A95 fuel runs dry at gas stations despite signs saying draining in progress. And then in occupied Luhansk, the pumps are already empty, with the Kremlin's proxies reduced to issuing calming statements instead of gasoline in the pump. So we're starting to see the cracks, the long-awaited issues of supply and demand, with Russian fuel prices rising to beyond 70 rubles a litre now, which is equivalent to about $3.30 US a gallon. But as mentioned before, the real cost felt all over Russia, adjusted for income, makes it equivalent to Russians paying approximately $13 a gallon. And with supply chains buckling, shortage spreading, and prices climbing, the signs suggest that the squeeze on Russia is only tightening, and the pressure is expected only to intensify. Now to the main map, starting in Kupansk, where invading forces decided to make a breakthrough on the left bank of the river. And by breakthrough, I mean the Russian T-90M tank that has the designation nickname of Breakthrough, with one seen emerging into view after a long absence, alas, destroyed, alongside a BM-21 Grad rocket launcher, a Kamaz truck, and a Tiger armored combat vehicle. The Russian armed forces, still unwilling to admit they're eking out only minimal and costly gains on the map, but for this case, not even able to lock them in. But to be fair to Russia, over the past day, the eking out of gains materialized in the Seversk direction, near Ria Rivka, squeezing out a square kilometer gain in their western-facing path on the highway, leaving roughly 490,000 square kilometers still stubbornly outside of Moscow's grasp. Then down on the map to Makivka, Big Bavovna style, with reports from locals of a site that was, quote, fenced with barbed wire that was taken in impact, presumed to be from another strike UAV, possibly on a local HQ, and a position coming from inside the old 2014 occupation Donbass lines, as indicated there in purple. And now on the map and to the somewhat adjacent Dogropila sector, as the stats are in, where Russian forces have suffered nearly a regiment worth of casualties at the acute Bunny Ears location on the map, coming out of the recent AFU counteroffensive operations in the region. As per official statements of the 1st Azov Corps, 910 KIA, 335 wounded in action, and 37 POWs. The equipment losses were comparatively more timid, with in total 8 tanks, 6 armored combat vehicles, 19 artillery pieces, and 103 motorcycles, ATVs, and cars, for a stat that they decided to mash together as part of that Russian circus show of a Frankenforce ensemble. Now, as for the map, Ukrainian forces continue stabilizing the front after recent Russian tactical infiltrations, with no significant changes in landscape reported, but where Russia now looks to be taking the route just west of here, with ongoing attempts to head north of the Popiv Yar direction. And the reality for the pooch, the dog giving the thumbs up here, well, realistically, it likely already has taken on a new mold not yet seen, but hopefully one of another cheery animal shape. Now, it also must be noted here, it is an interesting time for Russia to stage these recent attacks, with the number of Russian attacks since late July, about 3 weeks, which has been steadily declining, averaging now at roughly 150 attacks across Ukraine's entire front line per day, and the 90-day trend is also showing a clear decline as well. Looking back in history, the only similar trend was in October-November of last year, coming at the time of Russia's last big push of the 2024 offensive. And as for the August time of year, well, the expectation has been that Russia should really be amping up right now, as opposed to what we're currently witnessing here. So it does make for a curious trend with what's transpired here on the former Bunny Ears. Now to Zaporizia, where just when we thought we'd seen everything, at that point we never cease to be surprised at what Russia has put on display next. This time, a Russian armored vehicle with both Russian and US flags said to be heading into an assault near the Mala-Takmaka settlement in the Orikhiv direction. But all we know for sure about this footage is that this is Russian state media disseminated video for our viewing pleasure coming from RT News. It's designed to be a morale de-booster where it attempts to send the message that effectively the West is in ruins and there is no hope among Western nations, that kind of message. But hey, that's just RT News blatantly fulfilling its role as a mouthpiece for propaganda. Kremlin approved. Meanwhile, and at this very same front, but actually verifiable, was the true reality on the ground. Another tank was shelling Ukrainian armed forces positions near Mala-Takmaka, then received return fire by both artillery and FPV drones, where eventually the armored vehicle began to stall, leading to destruction or some very serious damage. Now to Odessa on the map, with the persistent Russian targeting of the Sokar oil depot, a site belonging to Azerbaijan's state oil company. When it was first struck back on August 9, Azerbaijan called it a deliberate hit by Russia and warned plainly, if it happened again, the response would shift. Not just humanitarian support for Ukraine, but military aid, a move that would amount to a clean break in Baku's relationship with Moscow, after already deteriorating pretty badly. And with 15 drones said to have exclusively targeted the depot overnight, the moment of fundamental change in Azerbaijan's foreign policy may have just arrived. Now to take a look around the map, with the destruction of a Ukrainian Humvee targeted by the Russian forces, Russian telegram channels are really cheering this one. But here's the part they skip. The crew filmed the strike fallout themselves, meaning they survived, and smiling. You could say, in other words, the Humvee did its job better than a Russian T-90 tank, whose crew can often be left as wreckage with no camera footage to tell the tale, much less be safely smiling at the sight. For Ukraine, the equation is fairly simple. Humvees are not in short supply compared to most platforms, but most importantly, the same trained crew is back in the fight when the Humvee call comes again. But for Russia, the reverse is true. Let's use the T-90 main battle tank as an example again. So the T-90 gets knocked out, is replaced with green recruits in a T-72, then a T-55 with more untrained hands, then golf carts, scooters, e-scooters, all the way down to a mule, and for that matter, a couple of horses we saw just the other day. So overall, you could say one side is reloading and the other side is regressing. Then back to a spot of news where this one's more of a funny, or better to say just laughable. So to round out the video today, as Russia's latest peace concession sounds like parody, being a constitutional amendment promising not to invade other countries. We know this because during an interview, Trump's envoy Witkoff said that Moscow is preparing to write into its constitution a pledge not to attack Europe. You shouldn't even need to write this into your constitution in the first place. This is such a Russian thing. With Witkoff dressing this latest Russian concession as robust security guarantees that even resemble Article 5 protections from the US. I doubt it. With Witkoff also seeming to suggest that Russia had agreed to a remarkable concession that it would not invade the rest of Ukraine. So this offer in plain English means that Russia will promise, in Russian law, not to do the very thing it's already doing. So with the stroke of a pen, Russia is willing to enshrine in its constitution to not invade or attack another European nation. That's very reassuring, yeah. As Putin literally writes and rewrites his own rules, making him president for life, invading Ukraine, and with the very same stroke of the pen, writing 5 Ukrainian regions into the Russian constitution. So where Witkoff called this a concession and robust security guarantees, and also called it heading in the right direction, quote unquote, for Russia pursuing a path to peace. But the only path this suggestion is headed in is ignorance. Like I said, not funny, but is laughable. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment. Thanks for all of the support, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.